Ultra-nationalist Avigdor Lieberman is reinstated as Israel's foreign minister after being acquitted of corruption charges. He's hawkish on the Palestinians and Iran, and his party is an important player in Netanyahu's coalition government. So just what impact will his return have on Israel's foreign policy? And how long will Lieberman remain Netanyahu's political ally? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sue Turton. He's been described as the worst foreign minister in Israel's history. And now, after being acquitted of corruption charges, Avigdor Lieberman is set to be reinstated as foreign minister. But at a particularly sensitive time for Israel's relations with the rest of the world, Lieberman's return is being seen as cause for concern. Well, the foreign minister has a strong constituency among right-wing Israelis, but he's a controversial figure. He was born and raised in the Soviet Union before immigrating to Israel in 1978 at the age of 20. Lieberman worked for the Likud party, but he resigned in 1997 in protest at negotiations with Palestinians. He went on to form the Yisrael Beteinu party in 1999. It's known to represent former Soviet immigrants who support a hard line in talks with Palestinians. 10 years later, Yisrael Beteinu took third place in parliamentary elections, and Lieberman, as kingmaker, took up the powerful post of foreign minister and deputy prime minister. In the past, he's created controversy by questioning the loyalty of Israeli Palestinians. He's also called for the removal of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, describing him as a diplomatic terrorist. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests. From Jerusalem, Jonathan Rynhold, senior researcher at the Begin-Sadat Centre for Strategic Studies at Bar Ilan University. Jonathan has also edited books on the Israeli elections. From Ramallah, Husam Zomlot, Fatah's Deputy Commissioner of Foreign Relations, and in London, Jonathan Sacerdoti, Middle East analyst and former Director of Public Affairs for the Zionist Federation in the UK. If I can start with you, Jonathan Sacerdoti. It's a very crucial time at the moment. We have a very, very delicate balance going on in Israel, both with the Iranian negotiations, the US Secretary of State Kerry saying we're on the edge of some sort of deal, and then of course we've got the talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis. What of an impact is this man going to have at this crucial time, joining Israeli politics now?
Well, it's a great question, and it's important, I think, when we're discussing Avigdor Lieberman, to try and separate out the caricature from the actual substance of the man. I mean, he is quite an enigmatic figure, and he certainly is a complex character, but he isn't necessarily only the things that many people around the world know him as. And at the same time as some of the more controversial things that people have heard about him, he's also the man who had a very close advisor for a very long time, who was Druze, who's now, I think, working in the UK, actually, at the Israeli embassy here. Now, I know for a fact that those people got on very well, and that he's promoted people in that way from minority populations in Israel to quite high position. So he obviously points towards those sorts of things in his history as evidence that his views aren't cut and dried and aren't simple when it comes to minorities. And again, he's also the man that has, some would say, broadened out Israel's diplomatic reach rather than closing it off, having opened more embassies around the world than previous foreign ministers, reaching as far as the Baltic and the Balkan states, reaching into Africa, making moves towards the Far East, and trying to broaden Israel's interactions with the wider world, not just in terms of the Palestinian issue, but also in other bilateral trade agreements.
Interesting, really, as you say, teasing apart the caricature from the real man. If I can turn to Husam Zomlot, I've got a quote here that I want to put to you. Zehava Galon, one of the liberal politicians in the Knesset, turned around when she heard that Netanyahu was about to bring this man back, saying his appointment will sabotage the diplomatic negotiations with the Palestinians and destroy Israel's diplomatic relations. Is she right?
Well, Zahava is not just a left-wing Israeli. She's the head of a political party that is Meretz, and you know, all polls give her the possibility of doubling her seats in the next Knesset. So she speaks on behalf of a political agency, and I'm afraid she's right. And I say I'm afraid because we would like to believe what Jonathan has just said. In reality, Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, opting back to bring Lieberman to the government in such a very important position as the face of Israel and the Foreign Minister of Israel dealing with its foreign policy is yet another sign that the current Israeli coalition headed by Netanyahu is not really opting for a diplomatic solution, is not opting to seize the moment of Kerry initiative and this momentum that is gathering, but really invested and interested in keeping the coalition, and most importantly in ensuring that this coalition will be represented by the maximum far right. Mr. Lieberman is a settler himself. He lives 18 kilometers deep inside the West Bank, and for the sake of his living there, the local communities has been absolutely displaced and transferred, and therefore this is not a man who would represent really a vision for the two-state solution. And here I'd like to say the following: we Palestinians are not really concerned with his criminal record or his financial dealings. This is for the Israeli legal system to sort out. We are interested in his public corruption and his political corruption, and for us he has really single-handedly over the last so many years have really brought this very significant segment of the Israeli society, the former Soviet Union residents that immigrated to Israel, came to Israel in the early 90s. He has shifted them far to the right, really pushing them into the maximalist approach, playing on their fears, and regrettably he has managed to do so. So
I'm just going to jump in there.
This is a public corruption.
I'm seeing Jonathan Sacerdoti shaking his head there. Your reaction to what Husam Zomlot just said?
Well, I think it's a great shame to hear someone like him saying those things, because the choice of whether or not these current talks continue is obviously one made on both sides. And Lieberman has already stated that he's given the green light to the continuation of the talks. And to say that Israel and under Benjamin Netanyahu is putting forward the most extreme far-right possible person to head those talks is absurd, when Tzipi Livni, who is a left-wing politician, is in fact the person that Israel has put forward. And Benjamin Netanyahu created a coalition with her unexpectedly for that very purpose. So I think it's quite hard to look at this situation and say that Israel isn't committed to those negotiations, especially after it has as well just released the second wave of killers with blood on their hands. These are terrorists who've murdered many Israeli civilians. Israel's trying its hardest to show, I believe, its will to enter into these negotiations and create goodwill. It's not Benjamin Netanyahu's doing that. Avigdor Lieberman is one of the most popular politicians in the country and actually received a democratic mandate to be in the government and therefore is able to be the foreign minister. Democratic mandate is something that may be unfamiliar to some of the Palestinians in Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, when Mahmoud Abbas's own democratic mandate expired long ago.
Maybe we could save that debate for another day. If I can just swing across to Jonathan Rynhold on this whole question, how powerful would Lieberman be anyway? Who are the people that make the decisions here? Is it the Prime Ministerial Office, is it the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, when it comes to foreign policy, or is it the Foreign Minister?
Traditionally in Israel, it's the Prime Minister who makes the most important decisions and is the central player on the key issues of foreign policy. And that includes the peace process and relations with the United States. That is the case today. It's the case in the past. It was the case when Mr. Lieberman was foreign minister in the Olmert government, which put an extremely wide-ranging offer on the table in 2009. And Mr. Lieberman didn't leave the government then. He was not a decisive player in putting forward that proposal. His importance comes in the cabinet when it comes to getting a majority in the cabinet, whether it's to go to war, whether it's to make peace. But he will not be a key player in the peace talks. In terms of Israel, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, he's been described as almost a threat to Benjamin Netanyahu because he has very strong right-wing credentials. Why would somebody like Netanyahu bring him back into the fold, if you like? Is this not a ridiculous state of affairs, that might be threatening his own situation, his own position in the future?
Well, right now, Mr. Netanyahu is far and away the most popular candidate in the public mind to be the leader and the Prime Minister. He has no serious challenges for the foreseeable future. In the long run, Mr. Lieberman is a challenger, but not in the short run. And one of the ways that you keep your rivals from challenging you is by making them complicit in your decision making. So if Mr. Netanyahu is going to make a compromise, put something forward, he wants Mr. Lieberman to be tied to it. And therefore, Mr. Lieberman can't run away and say, I told you so, and therefore garner support for those opposed to it, because he himself will be tied to such a thing. And of course, Mr. Netanyahu wants to have a stable government, and to do that, he needs as large a majority as possible. And Mr. Lieberman, contrary to perceptions, he's certainly hawkish, but he's pragmatic. He's not ideologically hawkish. He doesn't believe that Israel should never retreat from territory. In fact, he believes it's vital for Israel to have partition. It's vital that there is a two-state solution. He simply is extraordinarily skeptical that there is a Palestinian partner that's ready to meet Israel's minimal conditions.
I hear your voice and the voice of Jonathan Sacerdoti being very specific about trying to move away from the caricature, but as we heard earlier, he isn't shy of controversy. His comments about Israeli Palestinians have been called racist, and speaking about their roles as legislators in 2006, he said the fate of the collaborators in the Knesset will be identical to that of those who collaborated with the Nazis. Collaborators as well as criminals were executed after the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II. I hope that will be the fate of collaborators in this House. Jonathan Sacerdoti, that is a controversial thing to say.
Look, I don't deny that the man is controversial and he said controversial things. And as an analyst, my job is to try and separate out sometimes rhetoric from action and substance, and that counts for both sides. I mean, if we're going to talk about Nazi analogies and things like that, it's only a few days ago that photos came out of Al-Quds University in the West Bank showing students there in this otherwise considered liberal university doing Nazi-style fascist salutes in what appeared to be a very large rally. Now, I only bring that into the equation to say that we have these elements going on in all areas of this complex situation, and it's very important that when we use words like Nazi and we look at these sorts of things going on, that we look ultimately at the actions that are taken by the politicians and those in power. And it's very important that we try and recognize with Avigdor Lieberman that he has this big mandate, and that, as Jonathan, the other Jonathan just said, his actual influence in the negotiations and the talk is fairly minimal. Tzipi Livni has been put in charge of those negotiations. That was the terms of her joining the coalition in Israel. And it's simple that, you know, Avigdor Lieberman serves a role even within the government and within Israeli society as that person who does say these extreme things. Sometimes they're over the top, sometimes they're over the line, but at other times they're also things that I think many Israelis recognize have a grain of truth in them. I'm not suggesting the one you just quoted to me is one of those, but there are times when somebody like him gains popularity internally in the country by trying to call out what they see as the elephant in the room. So when he says that he supports a two-state solution and that has been a Yisrael Beitenu policy from before it was even a Likud policy, when he says things like that, he also tempers it with the information that he believes that sort of thing is unattainable within maybe 10 years because he feels that there isn't a suitable partner for negotiation on the other side. Now, if that is true, if what he says is an accurate piece of analysis, and that's for us all to decide for ourselves, what is the badness, the wrongness in him simply saying it? He's not the person that made it so. He's the person that's calling it out. And politically, that can play very well to a domestic audience when there's somebody that actually is brave enough to say those things. And I think that is how his supporters tend to see him in terms of some of those statements.
I mean, Husam Zomlot, he doesn't mince his words, but well, it's good to point out that he was very much backing the two-state solution before anybody else really got on board in Israel. Do you not see that maybe he might be somebody that can be done business with because he doesn't mince his words, he doesn't hold back?
I wish it is the case, and you know, you have the two Jonathans, but one of them is really engaged in rhetoric and bringing the discussion really not at the level that we want, quoting the Quds University and all this. I wish he was a man who would support such a step. All the indicators suggest that the definition of peace for us Palestinians is really different than some Israelis, including Mr. Lieberman. For us, peace is very clear. It is based on the recognition of the two nations to live in peace, to have their own states, that these two states will be on the 1967 borders. The Palestinian leadership has been absolutely unwavering for the last 25 years about this resolution. We have a policy and we have a strategy, and for that policy and strategy we have paid very dearly. We have engaged in our state building, we have kept law and order in our own cities, we have provided for the status quo, we have gone through the building of the institutions to prove that we can do it. We have knocked every door, and on the other hand, Israel has absolutely no policy. While we have recognized Israel on its 1967 borders, Israel has never recognized us to start with. Israel deals with the occupied territories, which the rest of the world considers occupied illegally, and the occupation has to end. Israel considers them to be at best disputed, and therefore it's a land grab race, and Mr. Lieberman is part of that land grab race, and we are no partner to somebody like Lieberman, who would say what you just said about the Palestinian citizens of Israel, which is by the way a quarter of the Israeli population. So let alone his mentality and how he will be dealing with Palestinians inside the 67 borders. I don't think the Palestinians would want to see a partner in somebody who is living literally on a theft land, on a land that was stolen from the Palestinians. I would love to see him coming out and saying, yes, Israel has a policy.
Many problems that the Palestinians might have with him by some of the things that you're saying. Just moving on to Jonathan Rynhold, there are other things that he is actually very much admired for, that I understand, by his popularity, that secular agenda that he holds. He supports civil marriage, drafting of the ultra-Orthodox into the military. Those are things that we don't really hear much about him when it comes to listening to, as we say, the more caricatural statements that we've talked about already.
Yes, I think that it's very important to understand that Mr. Lieberman's right-wing views will never allow him to become a mainstream leader in Israel, because they're just too extreme for the Israeli centre. The only thing that could allow him to appeal more broadly is his domestic agenda, which is more liberal. The last Israeli election, almost a year ago, was about domestic issues. It was about domestic issues because most Israelis do not believe that there is a Palestinian partner for peace. So Israelis said, well, if that's the case, what do we want to happen? We want to have an improvement in our economic situation. We want to have a change in the relationship between religion and state. We want to liberalize that. And we want the ultra-Orthodox, who are a growing percentage of the public, to join the workforce and join the army. And Mr. Lieberman played on those issues. However, because he did not support the compromises put forward by people over a year ago, he is not the champion of those issues. The champion of those issues is Yair Lapid, the finance minister. And that means that those issues, although he has claimed to represent the public on those issues, only the Russian-speaking public believe him. And that's not enough to challenge Mr. Netanyahu. So Mr. Lieberman really is not in a position to use those issues right now to challenge Mr. Netanyahu, and neither to challenge Mr. Lapid, who really represents those issues for the Israeli centre. The Israeli centre is willing to make very extensive compromises for the sake of peace. It simply doesn't believe that if it was to make greater compromises than it's willing to do, that it would actually get peace and security. And in that atmosphere, you can understand the reasons why issues to do with drafting the ultra-Orthodox and secular marriage raise their profile and become very important.
But shouldn't they be concerned about the image abroad, the global issue? And when the image of, when you hear things like that Nazi quote, people watching from the other side of the world will be thinking, and this person is right at the heart of Israeli government?
Yes, I think that there's two issues here. The first is Mr. Lieberman as a representative of the State of Israel in relations with other countries' representatives. When you talk to diplomats abroad, they tend to see Mr. Lieberman as a man you can do business with. They understand that he's pragmatic. They understand that he's different from Naftali Bennett, who really genuinely opposes the creation of a Palestinian state. However, the issue for Israel is not with the diplomats. The issue with Israel is that Mr. Lieberman's extreme public statements cause Israel's standing to be damaged with liberally minded publics in Europe and in the United States, many of whom are sympathetic to Israel because it is the only democracy in the region and because it's threatened by countries like Iran. So Mr. Lieberman's statements, while they may not do damage to the day-to-day functioning of government-to-government relations, do damage Israel's image abroad.
Husam Zomlot sitting around the table with the Palestinian and the Israeli discussion makers, the negotiators with looking forwards to peace. Is this going to be a topic that's brought up, the fact that this man is now foreign minister?
You know, this does not concern us. What concerns us really is not who the Israelis elect or who's in government. What concerns us is the policies of these governments, what we witness on the ground. And the policies of these governments are very, very clear. I very much agree with your latest guest from London that there is a change within the center and center-left of Israel towards really moving in the direction of the two-state solution, or if for anything, for the fear of the one-state formula. The problem is that Mr. Netanyahu is picking two main pillars in his coalition. Naftali Bennett, who was just mentioned by Jonathan, who is absolutely against the very principle, the very idea of a Palestinian state, let alone any solution. And the second is Lieberman. And in such a composition of government, when Netanyahu actually has almost or more than 70 members of the Knesset who are telling him they are willing to be part of his coalition and support a peace deal with the Palestinians, he is opting for the other side. So this is the message that is coming our way. And this is the most important discussion. Is the man the prime minister? And is this coalition and the composition of this coalition really capable to seize the carry moment and press ahead? And, you know, this was another indicator, the bringing back of Lieberman, that perhaps the internal Israeli dynamics will be now at play, and the Israelis will be negotiating among themselves and not really negotiating with us. Now, until Mr. Lieberman comes to terms with the fact that his policy must be ending Israeli occupation of our land, then I don't see his really value added when Mr. Netanyahu has all these Knesset members that are waiting. This is number one. Number two, I think we Palestinians have been absolutely clear about the terms of reference, where we want to go and where our borders should be. The problem is Israel has never ever tell us or anybody else where it wants really its definite borders, what it wants to see itself in terms of the region. And Mr. Lieberman remains to represent that maximal approach, meaning when he calls his peace initiative was that we should not exchange territory, we should exchange population. And for him, he wants to get rid of a big chunk of the Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. When such a proposition is put on the table, it tells you about the thinking of the man, the beliefs of the man.
I'm getting both Jonathans shaking their head at you on that last comment. I'm going to let Jonathan Sacerdoti just react.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off. You have given the two Jonathans.
Okay, no, you're thinking I'm being unfair with my time. I thought I was being fair, but if you want to finish your thought process.
Yes. No. Go ahead. You've given Jonathans 2-3 times.
No, please, well, finish your thought process. Please finish what you were saying.
What I wanted to say that let us not waste our time in the details of the Israeli politics or even the Palestinian politics. Let us discuss policy and strategy. And I want to pose the question for the two gentlemen you have in your studio. Does Israel now want to end its occupation that started on the 5th of June 1967? And does Israel, the current Israeli government, interested to create such a Palestinian state according to the international consensus that would enable two secure states to live side by side? This is the question. Let us not. I want to answer. I want to hear their answers.
Okay, Jonathan Sacerdoti, please.
Well, as far as I can see it, yes, they do, is my answer to that question. But more importantly, I think we need to engage, and by the way, to add the caveats to that, of course, is that they say they do, the government says it will, the Likud party prime minister says he believes in that, but of course they add to that certain other things like security for the state of Israel, which is understandable. But to move aside from that for just one moment, I would say that it does seem ironic that we have a voice from the Palestinian side telling us that Israel suffers from hideous infighting and that that's what's holding up peace negotiations, when we have a Gaza Strip from which Israel withdrew completely, and Mahmoud Abbas Hamas can't step foot in it. I think that if anyone, part of the problem is that if there are internal divisions on either side, it does make negotiation very complicated. But I think that the internal divisions, which certainly hold up any possible final status solution for the two sides, is it's probably a little bit worse on the other side, where there's a terrorist entity ruling the Gaza Strip with no democratic mandate, as opposed to the supposedly more moderate Fatah party and the Palestinian Authority, also with a lapsed democratic mandate. And I would also simply say that it is clear, as the other Jonathan said earlier on, that Lieberman may make these statements, but it's something which doesn't chime with the centre of Israeli society, and I'd agree with him that is one reason why Lieberman's potential internally, politically, is somewhat limited in that regard, because he takes quite extreme views at certain times, and I think that puts a limit on where he can go. But it isn't irrelevant. Earlier on it was dismissed that I mentioned Al-Quds University, but Saeb Erekat, who's the senior negotiator, is a trustee and governor of that university.
I'm cutting everybody off in equal measure. I'm very grateful to all three of my guests. Always a lively debate from this part of the world. From Jerusalem, Jonathan Rynhold; from Ramallah, Husam Zomlot; and from London, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Gentlemen, thank you very much for talking to us. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.